Millions of years of evolution. Millions. Our ancestors survived ice ages, predators, disease, famine, and the general inconvenience of living in a world that was actively trying to kill them. Every generation that made it here did so because they were just smart enough to avoid obviously bad ideas. And yet, somehow, there are still people who look directly at danger and respond with the same confidence as a man ordering fast food. Yeah, I'll take that risk. The 10 stories in this video are not accidents. Accidents happen when something unexpected goes wrong. These are stories of people who carefully built their own disaster, step by step, like a DIY project with catastrophic results. 10 master plans. 10 moments where common sense quietly packed its bags and left the building. And 10 reminders that natural selection never actually stopped working. It just got more creative. Starting with a man who believed that a national park safety railing was less of a safety device and more of a suggestion. 1. The Grand Canyon Prank. Spring 2019, the Grand Canyon, Arizona, one of the most breathtaking natural wonders on Earth. A mile deep, 277 miles long. Millions of tourists visit every year to stand quietly at the edge and appreciate the overwhelming power of geological time. But Kevin had other plans. Kevin was a 42-year-old father of 3 whose entire sense of humor had apparently peaked sometime around middle school. He was the guy who still thought jump scares were comedy gold, the uncle who hid behind doors during family gatherings, the man who measured the success of a joke by how many people briefly believed he might actually be dead. So when Kevin and his family stopped at a scenic overlook, he immediately saw an opportunity. The canyon was peaceful. Too peaceful, which meant it needed drama. Kevin's brilliant idea was simple. Hop the safety railing, pretend to slip, watch everyone panic. Then pop back up laughing while announcing the classic punchline, "Gotcha!" In Kevin's imagination, this was going to be legendary. The kind of story that gets told at every family holiday. Now, before we continue, let's pause for a quick physics lesson. The Grand Canyon drops up to 6,000 feet. That's over a mile straight down. The safety railings along the rim are not decorative. They exist because the ground near the edge is made of loose gravel sitting on top of extremely fragile sandstone. In other words, the terrain near the edge is basically a geological booby trap. But Kevin, unfortunately, had not studied geology. He had studied comedy. So over the railing he climbed. His New Balance sneakers landed on a narrow ledge of gravel that had been quietly waiting for exactly this kind of decision. His wife saw him climbing and sighed. Not panic, not shock, just the deep, exhausted sigh of someone who has spent years married to Kevin. Kevin spread his arms dramatically. "Oh no," he shouted. "I'm slipping!" His brother-in-law immediately pulled out his phone. Because when someone like Kevin starts performing near a cliff, you might as well document it. At this exact moment, Kevin was probably thinking something like, "This is genius. They're gonna laugh about this for years." And technically, he wasn't completely wrong, because they absolutely talk about it to this day. Just not the way he imagined. Loose gravel is a terrible stage. Kevin's left foot shifted. The pebbles beneath him quietly resigned from their positions. His fake arm flailing suddenly became real arm flailing. He reached for the railing. Too far. He reached for the rock wall. The rock crumbled. He reached for the air, which, as it turns out, is a terrible thing to grab onto. The fake scream became real. The fake fall became very real. Gravity, the least patient force in the universe, immediately took over. Kevin dropped roughly 400 feet in about 6 seconds, bouncing against the canyon walls like nature's version of a pinball machine. The video from his brother-in-law's phone ends with 7 seconds of silence. Then someone quietly says, "I don't think he's joking." Park rangers recovered Kevin 3 days later. His obituary described him as someone who loved making people laugh, which was technically true, because his family still talks about that moment at every gathering, just not as a joke. 2. The noise-canceling shortcut. Modern technology has solved many of humanity's greatest problems. We have smartphones that connect us instantly to the entire world, navigation apps that can guide us across continents, and noise-canceling headphones so advanced they can remove almost every unwanted sound from our environment. Airplane engines, construction equipment, crying babies, and, as one man discovered, the warning horn of a freight train moving at highway speeds. Meet Marcus, 36 years old, a software developer from Portland whose entire life revolved around one concept: optimization. Marcus didn't just like efficiency, he worshipped it. He tracked his daily productivity in spreadsheets. He calculated the exact amount of time saved by walking different routes to work. He even measured his sleep cycles with wearable devices that produced graphs he reviewed every morning like stock market data. To Marcus, wasted time wasn't just annoying, it was morally offensive. So, one evening in November 2021, Marcus faced what he considered a serious logistical problem. Walking home along the main road would take about 45 minutes, but if he cut through an old railway tunnel near the industrial district, it would only take 15 minutes. 30 minutes saved. 30 minutes of life reclaimed. In Marcus's mind, the decision practically made itself. Now, there is one small detail about railway tunnels that Marcus apparently decided was negotiable. They are used by trains. Large trains. Metal trains. Trains that weigh hundreds of tons and travel at speeds that make human reaction time largely irrelevant. But Marcus had a system, and systems always make people feel smarter than they actually are. His plan was simple: walk through the tunnel while listening to music. If a train approached, he would feel the vibrations through the ground and simply step into one of the maintenance alcoves built into the tunnel walls. A perfect plan, except for one upgrade Marcus had recently purchased: a pair of $300 noise-canceling headphones. Industry-leading active noise cancellation, engineered to eliminate external sound with incredible precision, which Marcus demonstrated immediately by turning them on and blasting Slayer at maximum volume. Now, before we continue, let's have a quick engineering lesson. Modern freight trains are not the loud, rumbling machines people imagine. Many modern locomotives glide along continuously welded rails that minimize vibration and noise. From a distance, they can be surprisingly quiet. But train engineers assume something important: that people walking in tunnels will be able to hear a warning horn that is specifically designed to be heard from half a mile away. Marcus had just purchased technology specifically designed to erase that horn from existence. He entered the tunnel, music screaming in his ears, concrete walls stretching endlessly ahead. And because Marcus liked to see where he was going, he walked facing forward, which meant the train would approach from behind. At some point during the walk, Marcus was probably feeling very satisfied with himself. 30 minutes saved. 30 minutes every workday. 2.5 hours per week. More than 130 hours a year. He could practically write a productivity article about it. Life hack: how I optimized my commute. Unfortunately, the train conductor saw Marcus about 8 seconds before impact. 8 seconds. Enough time to slam the horn. Nowhere near enough time to stop a machine that requires nearly a mile to fully brake. Inside the tunnel, the horn echoed violently, but Marcus's $300 headphones calmly deleted it from reality. Slayer continued playing. Marcus continued walking. The locomotive's headlights illuminated the tunnel walls behind him like a sunrise moving at 120 miles per hour. He never turned around. The impact was instantaneous. Investigators later found Marcus's headphones about 30 feet from the scene, still intact, still playing music, still canceling noise perfectly. The railway company released a public reminder shortly afterward. Railway tunnels are not pedestrian walkways. Marcus's spreadsheet showed that his shortcut saved him 28 minutes per week. The train, unfortunately, saved him considerably more than that. Specifically, every minute he would have ever had again. 3. The Ferris wheel hero. A warm Saturday evening, Mapleview County Fair, rural Ohio. The air smelled like funnel cakes, popcorn, livestock, and poor decisions that would be deeply regretted by morning. The Ferris wheel rotated slowly against a perfect orange sunset, carrying couples and families toward the top for a scenic view of the parking lot and livestock pavilion. It was wholesome, calm, peaceful, which meant it was the perfect environment for Tyler. Tyler was 24 years old and had built his entire personality around one idea: adrenaline equals attraction. Tyler believed women didn't want stability. They didn't want emotional intelligence. They definitely didn't want retirement plans or responsible financial behavior. No. Tyler was convinced that what women truly wanted was a man willing to almost die in front of them. His date that evening was Ashley, a nursing student who had made the unfortunate decision of matching with him on Tinder approximately 3 hours earlier. The date had been normal, until they reached the Ferris wheel. Ashley looked up at the slow-moving ride and casually said something that, for most humans, would have been harmless small talk. "This seems kind of boring." For Tyler, this was not a comment. This was a challenge. His brain immediately began producing a cinematic trailer. One man, one wheel, one unforgettable moment. What Ashley meant was, this ride moves slowly. What Tyler heard was, prove your worth through reckless physical endangerment. And Tyler had a plan. While their gondola descended toward the bottom of the wheel, he announced it confidently. He was going to climb the Ferris wheel from the outside, while it was moving. Now, quick carnival engineering lesson. Ferris wheels look sturdy, but the exterior framework is coated with industrial grease to keep the machinery operating smoothly. Those beams that look like convenient climbing bars from the ground are often decorative trim bolted onto the structure. And carnival rides are assembled and disassembled constantly, which means structurally sound is often less of a guarantee and more of a hopeful suggestion. Tyler knew none of this, because research is for people who lack confidence, and confidence was Tyler's primary skill. As the gondola reached the bottom, he jumped out. Ashley immediately said the only logical sentence available: "Tyler, don't. You're going to die." Tyler interpreted this as flirtation. With the swagger of a man who had never once experienced consequences, he grabbed the steel framework and began climbing. The crowd nearby noticed almost immediately. Phones came out. Because when someone starts climbing a Ferris wheel at a county fair, it quickly becomes the evening's main entertainment. The first 30 feet went surprisingly well. Adrenaline makes people stronger. It also makes them significantly dumber. Tyler climbed confidently. People cheered. Ashley looked like someone reconsidering every life decision that had led her to this moment. At about 50 feet up, reality arrived. Tyler's hands were now covered in sweat and grease. The industrial grease coating the beams began doing exactly what grease does best: reducing friction. His grip shifted from confident to careful to desperate. You know the moment in cartoons where a character suddenly looks down and realizes how high they are? Tyler had that moment. Except this wasn't a cartoon, and there was no convenient ledge. His foot slipped. He grabbed another beam. His hand slid. The Ferris wheel continued rotating slowly, which meant Tyler wasn't just climbing anymore. He was also drifting away from the center of balance. Then, physics decided the show was over. His hand lost its grip. The fall wasn't clean. Ferris wheels are essentially vertical obstacle courses. On the way down, Tyler struck a support beam. Then another. Then another. The sounds echoed across the fairgrounds in a way that instantly killed the festive atmosphere. He finally landed on the mechanical housing at the base of the ride with a heavy thud that silenced the entire crowd. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. At the very top of the wheel, Ashley remained frozen in her gondola. Firefighters had to rescue her nearly an hour later. She deleted Tinder that same night. Tyler's obituary described him as adventurous, which, to be fair, wasn't inaccurate. It just didn't mention that adventure without gravity awareness tends to end very quickly. And to this day, Mapleview County Fair has a new unofficial safety rule. If someone suggests climbing the Ferris wheel to impress a date, the answer is no, every time. 4. The Stadium Blackout Plan. October 2017. Thessaloniki, Greece. A packed soccer stadium vibrating with noise, tension, and thousands of fans emotionally invested in the outcome of a match that would absolutely ruin someone's evening. Among them was Dimitri, 44 years old. A man who didn't just watch soccer, he experienced it. Dimitri was the type of fan other fans slowly backed away from. The kind who painted his face before kickoff. The kind whose voice was permanently damaged from screaming at referees who were half a stadium away and completely unable to hear him. The kind who reacted to every bad call like it was a personal betrayal, because to Dmitri, it was. By the 78th minute, his team was losing, and then it happened. The referee awarded a penalty to the opposing team. To normal fans, this meant disappointment. To Dmitri, it meant injustice on a cosmic level. The referee was clearly blind, or corrupt, or both. The stadium erupted in shouting, and inside Dmitri's head, logic quietly shut down. Because Dmitri had an idea, a solution, a heroic intervention. He would stop the game. His plan formed instantly. Climb the stadium's lighting tower, cut the power. No lights, no game, no penalty. Elegant, decisive, heroic. Now, quick electrical engineering lesson. High voltage power lines typically carry between 69,000 and 500,000 volts. For comparison, it takes roughly 0.1 amps of electricity to stop the human heart. Transmission lines carry thousands. Contact doesn't just injure you, it essentially turns you into a brief, very bright electrical event. But Dmitri was angry, and anger is famously terrible at doing math. So while security guards shouted at him and nearby fans yelled for him to come down, Dmitri started climbing. The metal tower was wet from rain, the rungs were slippery, but adrenaline and fury carried him upward. Halfway up, breathing heavily, Dmitri probably had a brief moment of doubt. A tiny voice asking, "Is this really worth it?" But that voice was quickly drowned out by a much louder one. "You're a hero. They'll remember this. You'll save the game." 60 feet above the stadium floor, Dmitri reached a maintenance platform. Nearby ran the thick electrical cables feeding power to the massive floodlights. At that moment, the entire stadium noticed him. 40,000 people stopped watching the match. Now, they were watching Dmitri. In his mind, this was the climax of his heroic moment. He found a metal rod near the platform, lifted it dramatically, and prepared to strike the cable. Below him, security screamed, fans shouted, phones recorded everything. Dmitri swung. The moment metal touched the live wire, the entire tower exploded with light. Witnesses later described a blinding blue-white flash that briefly turned the night sky into daylight. For about 3 seconds, the stadium lights went out. Backup generators immediately restored power. The game paused, then resumed. But Dmitri's moment of heroism had ended instantly. His electrified silhouette had already burned itself permanently into the memories of 40,000 spectators. The match continued 2 hours later. The penalty kick was successful. Dmitri's team lost 2-1. His memorial Facebook page filled with messages reading, "Rest in power," which someone later pointed out was unintentionally ironic. The comment was quietly deleted. 5. The Rhino Whisperer. Spring 2018, Stuttgart Municipal Zoo, Germany. A place where families come to admire wildlife from a safe distance. Children eat overpriced ice cream, and trained professionals make sure the animals stay exactly where they're supposed to. One of those professionals was Klaus, 52 years old, senior zookeeper, 30 years of experience, and, unfortunately, 30 years of slowly developing a dangerous belief. Klaus didn't just work with animals. He believed he understood them. Not in a scientific, behavioral sense, in a spiritual sense. Klaus was convinced he had a unique connection with animals that ordinary people simply couldn't comprehend. He talked to the meerkats. He sang folk songs to the hippos. He once told a new employee that the elephants recognized him and remembered his birthday. For 3 decades, this delusion had remained relatively harmless. Because Klaus mostly worked with herbivores and birds, animals whose primary response to humans is running away. But in 2018, budget cuts forced the zoo to reorganize staff, which is how Klaus found himself assigned to a new enclosure, the white rhinoceros exhibit, specifically a 2-ton male named Bruno. Now, before we continue, quick zoology lesson. A white rhinoceros weighs roughly 2,300 kilograms. That's about the same weight as a small truck. They can run up to 30 miles per hour. Their skin is so thick it can deflect certain small caliber bullets, and their horn is essentially a naturally occurring spear capable of puncturing steel. They also have poor eyesight, which means when they feel threatened, they often charge first and investigate later. Standard veterinary protocol for sedating a rhinoceros is extremely simple. You use a tranquilizer dart gun from outside the enclosure, from a safe distance. Klaus had access to this equipment. He chose not to use it because Klaus believed the dart gun would stress Bruno, and Klaus had a better idea, a humane approach. He would walk into the enclosure and inject the sedative manually. Witnesses later reported that Klaus explained his reasoning with complete confidence. Bruno knows me. He trusts me. This will be calmer for him. At this exact moment, Klaus was probably imagining a future training seminar, building trust with large mammals. Unfortunately, Bruno had not attended that seminar. Klaus entered the enclosure holding a syringe. Bruno was grazing peacefully in the grass. Klaus approached slowly, speaking softly. "Easy, Bruno. It's just Klaus, your friend." For a brief moment, everything looked fine. Klaus reached the rhino's side, inserted the needle, and pushed the sedative. Then Bruno reacted. Not angrily, not maliciously, just instinctively. 2 tons of animal muscle moved faster than Klaus could process. The rhino swung his massive head sideways. The horn didn't even need to make contact. The sheer force of the movement knocked Klaus off his feet instantly. Bruno, now startled and confused, responded the way rhinos respond to perceived threats. He made sure the threat wasn't getting back up. The entire event lasted only a few seconds. Zoo staff rushed in after Bruno was safely contained, but by then, the situation was already beyond saving. The zoo released an official statement the next day. It described the event as a tragic deviation from established safety protocols, which was a very polite way of saying, the safety protocols existed. Klaus simply chose to ignore them. At Klaus's memorial service, someone placed a framed photograph near the flowers. It showed him standing next to Bruno from the previous year, smiling proudly. In that photo, Bruno was lying peacefully on the ground, sedated, properly, with a tranquilizer dart, administered by someone else. 6. The Ice Cave Trophy. February 2020, Northern Iceland. A frozen landscape that looks like it belongs on another planet. Deep beneath the glaciers, natural ice caves form every winter. Their walls glow electric blue from compressed glacial ice. The ceilings hang with massive icicles, some taller than a person, formed slowly over decades by melting water that refreezes layer by layer. Tour companies bring visitors here every year, but before entering, every guide gives the same instructions. Stay on the marked path, do not touch the formations, and most importantly, never stand directly under the large icicles, because those things are not decorations. They are frozen spears weighing hundreds of pounds, and gravity has a lot of patience. Enter Eric, 28 years old, adventure tourist, owner of an Instagram account called Extreme Eric Adventures. Eric's entire online identity was built on one simple philosophy: rules are for people who lack courage. His social media feed was a highlight reel of increasingly questionable decisions: standing on do not cross barriers at waterfalls, climbing past safety ropes on mountain cliffs, posing next to warning signs while flipping them off. His bio proudly declared, "Rules are for people who can't handle life." His best friend Lars traveled with him on this Iceland trip, officially as a travel companion, unofficially as a cameraman. Because every bad decision Eric made had to be documented. When their tour group entered the ice cave, the guide delivered the standard safety talk. Eric listened carefully, which is to say, he immediately began searching for the most dangerous possible photo opportunity. And he found it. At the center of the cave hung a massive icicle, 6 feet long, thick as a human torso, suspended from the ceiling like a giant frozen dagger. Eric stared at it the way a trophy hunter stares at a rare animal. He needed it. Not photograph it, not admire it, own it. Now let's pause for a quick physics lesson. Glacial icicles can weigh 200 pounds or more. Their tips compress into extremely dense ice sharp enough to puncture metal, and the connection point where they attach to the cave ceiling is constantly melting and refreezing, meaning their structural stability is essentially a slow-motion coin toss. Vibrations accelerate that instability dramatically, like, for example, throwing rocks at them. Eric positioned himself directly beneath the icicle. Lars immediately realized what was happening. "Eric, don't." Eric waved him off. "It's just ice, bro." "Film this." Eric picked up a rock. He threw it at the base of the icicle. Thunk. Nothing happened. Eric smiled. Second rock. Thunk. The icicle creaked. A sound that most humans would interpret as a warning. Eric interpreted it as progress. "It's working!" he shouted. Third rock. Bigger. Thunk. The cave echoed. Then came a new sound. Crack. That sound traveled through the entire cave like a gunshot. The icicle broke free instantly. Eric had about 1 second to understand what was happening. According to Lars, Eric's expression went through 3 stages: excitement, confusion, pure terror. The 200-pound spear of compressed ice did not fall into Eric's arms. It fell directly onto him. Rescue crews later described the scene as one of the strangest accidents they had ever seen. The cave was closed for 3 days while authorities recovered Eric's body. Meanwhile, something interesting happened online. Eric's Instagram account exploded with new followers. His final photo, taken moments before the incident, received more likes than anything he had posted while alive. Eventually, Lars memorialized the account. He changed the bio. It now reads, "Rules existed for a reason." 7. The $5 Hat. January 2019. Great Ocean Road, Victoria, Australia. One of the most scenic coastal drives on Earth. Towering limestone cliffs, violent waves crashing against ancient rock formations, and dozens of scenic overlooks where tourists stop to admire the view and take photos that look much calmer than the reality of the ocean below. Among the visitors that afternoon was Sandra, 39 years old, an accountant from Melbourne. Sandra was the kind of person who believed strongly in responsible spending. Not cheap, just financially disciplined. She tracked household expenses, compared grocery prices between stores, and believed deeply that wasting money was a personal failure. On paper, these are admirable traits, until they collide with the Pacific Ocean. Sandra had stopped at one of the popular cliffside viewpoints with her husband and 2 children. A powerful windstorm was rolling in from the sea. Tourists leaned against the railing, watching waves slam violently against the rocks below. Sandra had purchased a simple souvenir earlier that day, a cheap baseball cap with a kangaroo logo. $5, nothing special, just a small reminder of the trip. Then the wind took it. One sudden gust lifted the hat off her head and sent it tumbling over the safety barrier. It landed on a narrow rock ledge about 20 feet below. Her husband shrugged. Forget it. Her kids said the same thing. Mom, leave it. To everyone else, the situation was obvious. $5 hat, bottomless ocean, case closed. But Sandra's brain didn't see it that way. Sandra's brain saw numbers. Hat, $5. Parking, $12. Fuel to drive here, $47. The hat represented a measurable percentage of the day's spending, and Sandra had not driven 3 hours to donate money to the ocean. It's the principle, she said. The ocean, unfortunately, has never respected principles. Sandra climbed over the barrier. Nearby tourists started shouting. One German tourist waved his arms wildly. A warning sign, featuring a stick figure being swept off a cliff, strongly agreed with him. Sandra ignored all of them, because Sandra had already done the math. Quick oceanography lesson. Along this coastline, waves don't always behave predictably. Rogue waves form when ocean swells combine in just the right way. They appear suddenly, without warning, and they can surge far higher than normal wave patterns. Sandra carefully climbed down toward the ledge. The rocks were slick with algae. Ocean spray soaked her clothes immediately, but she kept moving, because the hat was right there, 20 feet below. Victory was within reach. Her fingers finally closed around it. She held it up triumphantly. $5 saved. Take that, ocean. Then 12 feet of Pacific Ocean arrived. The rogue wave hit the rock shelf with explosive force. Sandra had about 1 second to react, which she used to grip the hat tighter. The water slammed into the cliff. When it retreated, Sandra went with it. Her husband's phone captured the moment, a wall of white water, a glimpse of Sandra's arm still holding the cap. Then nothing. Search and rescue teams found her 3 days later, nearly 6 kilometers down the coastline. The hat was never recovered. Local authorities later installed an additional warning sign at the overlook. It reads, "No personal item is worth your life." A message that would have saved Sandra roughly $47,000 in funeral expenses, a number she almost certainly would have found very upsetting. 8. The Watermelon Rocket Scientist. July 2020, rural Texas, a place where backyard engineering projects are practically a cultural tradition. Most of them involve trucks, some involve fireworks, and a very small number involve launching large fruit into the upper atmosphere. Which brings us to Darren, 41 years old, self-described inventor, owner of a small YouTube channel dedicated almost entirely to building things that had absolutely no practical purpose. Darren didn't make furniture. He didn't repair houses. He didn't build anything useful. Darren built machines designed to answer questions that no responsible person had ever asked. His previous inventions included a homemade potato cannon powerful enough to shatter a neighbor's window, a jet-powered bicycle that lasted roughly 8 seconds before destroying his fence, and a scrap metal catapult that accidentally launched a bowling ball through his garage door. His modest subscriber base followed him for one reason. Everyone suspected that eventually, one of these experiments was going to go very wrong. Darren's newest invention was his greatest achievement, a giant industrial slingshot. Constructed from salvaged steel beams, bolted together in a structure that looked like something a cartoon villain would order from an Acme catalog. The launch bands were made from thick surgical tubing, purchased in bulk from a medical supplier that really should have asked more questions. The machine could launch heavy objects hundreds of feet straight into the air. For the demonstration video, Darren chose a projectile, a watermelon. Now, before we continue, quick physics lesson. A watermelon weighs about 15 pounds. If launched high enough, gravity will bring it back down at roughly terminal velocity, which means it returns to Earth at speeds comparable to dropping a bowling ball from several hundred feet. And here is the most important rule of projectile physics. Objects launched straight upward tend to come back down, almost exactly where they started. Darren had not done this calculation. He loaded the watermelon into the sling. His friend Mike stood several yards away holding the camera. Mike asked a reasonable question. "Maybe you should step aside after you launch it?" Darren laughed. "No way. I'm going to track it the whole way up and catch it on the way down." Content gold. With dramatic flair, Darren pulled the release. The industrial tubing snapped forward with a sound like a gunshot. The watermelon launched skyward. Fast. Really fast. It shot upward like a green missile, basketball size, then softball size, then golf ball size, then a tiny black dot. Then it vanished completely into the blazing white Texas sun. Darren stood exactly where he launched it, squinting into the sky, trying to follow its trajectory. "Where is it?" he asked. "I can't see it." Now, when you stare directly into bright sunlight, something interesting happens. Your eyes temporarily lose the ability to distinguish dark objects against the glare, which means the watermelon, falling directly back toward him, was completely invisible. 500 feet above him, the watermelon had already reached its peak and begun accelerating back toward Earth. Mike's camera captured Darren shading his eyes, still searching the sky. "Where did it?" He never finished the sentence. The watermelon struck him at nearly 200 miles per hour. The sound was so sudden that Mike initially thought the slingshot had exploded. The camera footage ends with Mike lowering the camera slowly, unable to process what had just happened. The video was never uploaded. Local news later reported the incident under the headline, "Texas Man Killed by Own Invention." County officials confiscated the slingshot. One inspector later described it as the most dangerous homemade device we've encountered in 20 years. Ironically, the machine itself was completely undamaged. 9. The Piranha Expert. March 2021. Deep in the tributaries of the Rio Negro, Brazil, a place where the water moves slowly, the jungle hums with life, and the river contains more things capable of killing you than most people would find comforting. Among those things, the piranha. a small fish with a reputation that Hollywood has turned into pure nightmare fuel. In reality, most piranhas are cautious scavengers. They rarely attack humans. But there are two situations where that changes instantly: when the water is disturbed and when blood enters the water. Both signals mean the same thing: easy food. Unfortunately, Roberto had spent 30 years convincing himself none of this mattered. Roberto was 53, a lifelong fisherman from Manaus. He had grown up on these rivers, caught piranhas, cooked piranhas, used piranhas as bait. And after decades of doing this without incident, Roberto had developed the most dangerous mindset a human can have around dangerous animals: complete confidence. He loved mocking nervous tourists. Whenever visitors asked about swimming in the river, Roberto would laugh. "Piranhas only eat dead things," he liked to say. "They're more scared of you than you are of them." Over the years, he repeated that line so often, it stopped being a joke. It became a belief. On a humid morning in March 2021, Roberto was fishing with his friend Carlos in a quiet section of river known locally for large schools of red-bellied piranhas. Fishing was slow that day, but Roberto had one thing working in his favor: his lucky lure. A cheap plastic frog he had nicknamed Lucky Maria. Roberto swore the lure had helped him catch hundreds of fish. To him, it wasn't just fishing equipment, it was practically family. Which made what happened next deeply personal. Lucky Maria snagged on a submerged log. The line pulled tight. Any experienced fisherman knows the solution: cut the line, lose the lure, move on. But Roberto had history with Lucky Maria. He was not abandoning her. Carlos suggested cutting the line. Roberto shook his head. "Relax," he said. "Those things won't touch me." He removed his shirt and slipped into the water. Now here's the part Roberto forgot. Piranhas are triggered by disturbance. Thrashing water signals struggling prey. And Roberto had another problem he had completely ignored. Earlier that morning he had cut his palm slightly on fishing line, a small cut, barely noticeable, until it entered the water. Under the surface, Roberto reached the submerged branches. Lucky Maria was tangled tightly. He pulled, he kicked, he thrashed, essentially ringing the underwater equivalent of a dinner bell. The cut on his palm reopened. Tiny threads of blood spread through the water. Within seconds, the first piranhas appeared. Roberto surfaced triumphantly, Lucky Maria in hand. "Got her," he shouted to Carlos. Then he felt something brush his leg. Then another. Then dozens of small, sharp pinches all at once. The water around him started moving, fast. Carlos grabbed an oar and tried to reach him, but the boat drifted just out of range. Roberto went underwater, then surfaced again. This time the triumph was gone. Then he disappeared again. The river closed over him. The entire event lasted less than 2 minutes. Search teams looked for hours, but the river had already done what rivers do. Carlos later gave a statement to local police. His words became something of a legend among local fishermen. He said, "He saved the lure, and the lure is probably still floating somewhere. Roberto isn't." Lucky Maria was later found drifting quietly downstream, completely intact, still the luckiest thing in the river, just not for its owner. 10. The Sungazing Enlightenment. Now for the final story, and like many modern tragedies, this one begins on YouTube. Meet Vikram, 34 years old, IT professional from Mumbai, a perfectly normal man whose life took a strange turn the moment he discovered the internet's wellness rabbit hole. It started harmlessly, a video about meditation, then mindfulness, then breathing exercises, and then the algorithm did what the algorithm does best. It kept recommending things. Soon Vikram discovered a niche community promoting something called sungazing. According to several extremely confident YouTube gurus, humans had forgotten their true biological potential. The claim was simple: if you stare directly at the sun during safe hours, your body absorbs solar energy. The benefits, according to the videos, included mental clarity, physical healing, spiritual awakening, and eventually, the ability to live without food. Because apparently humans were secretly designed to photosynthesize like plants. Actual ophthalmologists have a slightly different explanation. It's called solar retinopathy. Direct sunlight damages the retina, specifically the photoreceptor cells responsible for vision. Once those cells burn out, they don't regenerate. The result is permanent blindness. Vikram did not watch the ophthalmologists. He watched the gurus. For 6 months, he followed their advice religiously. Each morning, he practiced sun gazing longer and longer. His journal entries described the experience as an awakening. His friends described it as extremely concerning. But Vikram had already moved beyond skepticism. He believed he had discovered something profound, and he wanted to take it to the next level. His reasoning was simple. If sun gazing works, then being closer to the sky should increase its power, which is how Vikram began hiking regularly to a cliffside overlook in the Western Ghats, a narrow rock ledge overlooking a 300-foot drop, the perfect place in his mind to absorb maximum solar energy. Quick biology lesson. When someone stares directly at the sun for extended periods, the retina begins to fail. Vision becomes blurry, then washed out. Then eventually the person loses the ability to distinguish shapes or depth, which becomes a serious problem if you are standing near the edge of a cliff. Human balance depends heavily on visual reference points. Remove those reference points suddenly, and the brain struggles to understand where level ground actually is. On Vikram's final morning, the sunrise was bright and clear. Hikers later reported seeing him sitting peacefully near the cliff edge, eyes fixed directly on the rising sun. To them, he looked calm, centered, enlightened. What they were actually seeing was the early stages of retinal damage. 20 minutes into his meditation, the damage was severe. Vikram's vision turned into a bright white haze. Objects blurred together. Depth perception vanished. He stood up to adjust his balance, but his brain no longer understood which direction was safe. His damaged vision interpreted a slight forward lean as a backward tilt, so he corrected himself by stepping forward. The cliff did the rest. Hikers discovered his body later that afternoon at the base of the rock face. Investigators later pieced together his final months using his journal entries and YouTube watch history, a digital trail leading directly from wellness content to catastrophic misunderstanding. The channels that had promoted sun gazing never acknowledged the incident. They continued posting new videos, promising spiritual enlightenment to anyone willing to stare into the sun long enough. Under one of those videos, a viewer left a comment, "Has anyone actually died from this?" No one replied. Evolution has been refining human survival instincts for millions of years, but occasionally, someone decides they know better than physics, better than biology, better than gravity. And when that happens, nature doesn't argue, nature simply demonstrates. So here's a question for you. What's the dumbest decision you've ever made that could have easily landed you in a video like this? Be honest. Anonymous accounts are completely acceptable. No judgment, just science. And if you'd like to see more real stories where common sense briefly left the building, make sure to subscribe. Before